Girish, hi. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Long time.
Hi, Ashu. Long time, long time. This COVID is, just made things so much difficult to meet in person. It's just crazy. I'm just so much missing the social interactions that we used to have.
Of course, and I think you've been the you've been somebody who's been always available, right, for a catch up and and the lovely coffees and everything, right.
Correct.
But I agree with you. I think this has been a very difficult time. I hope things are safe with you, around you, in the
Yeah.
portfolio, across.
Yes. So far, so good. God has been kind.
Wonderful, wonderful. Girish, this is an exciting discussion, and having known you, I have had the opportunity of talking to you at so many levels, right, across so many issues, right. And I understand, while you've been on the investing side, you've also been a mentor for many of us, right, who've been out there in the circuit. But before we dive into all of that discussion, which is part of the agenda today, it'll be nice if we could, you could introduce yourself. You could tell us a little more your nest. It's been there for a while. You've invested in some very exciting businesses. If you could take us through that bit, it'll be a lovely start.
Sure. So I've been, born and brought up Delhi boy.
Mhm.
Went to Mothers International School.
Right.
Finished my science, graduated in science from there.
Sure.
I was the only guy from my batch to get into Stephens.
Uh-huh.
And this was I was the second batch of Stephens of computer science graduates to pass out from Delhi University.
Right.
So those were the times when we still had cathode ray tubes, and you would switch it on and go get a coffee, and by that time that green dot will come on the screen to tell you that it is now up and about.
Right.
We started when we started programming. There used to be 5.25-inch floppy disks. I don't know if you've even seen some of those.
Sure.
And then Windows came in, and then Windows got launched. And I think late 90s, early 90s, and then 3.5-inch floppies became the DRAM.
Yeah.
So I belong to that generation of computer science folks. Fortran or Basic or COBOL में programming करते थे हम.
Right.
Then, but I was clear that I wanted to, do an MBA. So started preparing for CAT while I was in college itself.
Right.
And managed to get through to IMT Ghaziabad in the first round. And then joined IMT Ghaziabad and majored in finance. So I was a finance topper, and I was probably the only guy only non-finance guy who did pure finance as a major.
Interesting.
So yeah, and then because topper था, तो कीला था कि दिल्ली में नहीं काम करना.
Right.
ठीक है, because finance is the financial capital is Bombay, so
It
Bombay
is
में
Mumbai, correct.
Bombay
Yeah.
में काम करेंगे.
Right.
उस टाइम पे बॉम्बे होता था, उस टाइम पे मुंबई नहीं हुआ था.
जी.
And so day zero पे Escorts Financial आई, तो हम बैठे नहीं उसके ऊपर,
Right.
because they were giving a position in Delhi.
Right.
So next day there was this company called Sipco which came to the campus.
Right.
And we sat for the interview, got through, and went to Bombay.
Right.
Sipco was very interesting because this was just after the Harshad Mehta scam.
Mm-hmm.
And Bhupen Dalal, who was one of the founders of Sipco,
Right.
because there were some issues with the scam, etc., and a lot of good people had left them.
Right.
So I had a very steep learning curve for 18 months that I spent, 20 months that I spent in Sipco.
Right.
So I started as a trainee, right?
Right.
And within 6 months, I was made a manager.
Right.
Within a year, I was managing a $20 million NRI portfolio.
Interesting.
And I was doubling in as a stockbroker for the Bombay Stock Exchange card that they used to run.
Oh, wonderful.
And those were the times when there was this rotunda in the Bombay Stock Exchange, which is still there, and there was no online system, so there was this public outcry system that used to happen 2 hours a day. My only job was to do arbitrage in Reliance shares. So there were two guys who used to market make in Reliance, one in one corner and the other diametrically opposite. My only job was to buy at 5 rupees lower and sell at 5 rupees higher, 1,000 shares a day.
Right.
Make 5,000 rupees for the firm. Okay.
Interesting. Interesting.
Sometimes you used to get it done like 20 minutes. Sometimes
Right.
it used to take 2 hours and you would still not get to do it.
Right.
So those were the days, and then OTC exchange came, so I was the sponsor for the OTC exchange for the firm, etc. Then I, moved out and joined a Gujarati family which was managing a $50 million surplus.
Okay.
And this was 95. And
Right.
$50 was like shitloads of money.
Right.
Worked there for about a year and a half, and just didn't like Bombay.
Mhm.
I was alone, even though I was not married. I was a bachelor.
Right.
But just the weather and all that stuff was just too killing.
Right.
And I was too born in blood Delhi, right? So first
Right.
opportunity I got, I ran back to Delhi and joined Dower Finance.
Right.
So that's where I first met Sunil.
Uh-huh.
So when I was head of strategy for Dower Finance, Sunil was head of strategy for Dower India.
Okay.
So Sunil, is my partner, right?
Right.
And so we overlapped for a few years, and then I moved on and joined a investment boutique firm in Delhi, where we were raising money for telcos and ISP just before the dot-com bust.
Interesting.
Late 90s.
Okay. Right.
So got to understand that how the telecom business works.
Right.
And then this was early day for Airtel's. They had just acquired Punjab and HP Circle.
Right.
They were in the process of acquiring AP and Karnataka. Delhi
Right.
was the flagship circle.
Right.
And they were looking for somebody in the marketing department with numbers background.
Right.
To help them with their segmentation, forecasting.
Right.
So I did some of
Right.
that stuff. And when I joined Airtel, within 7 months, Sunil joined Airtel.
Oh, interesting.
As executive assistant to Sunil.
Right.
So we again overlapped for 3.5 years.
Right.
And there I did media. So I started with market planning. I did media planning. I was the largest buyer of media in the city of Delhi for 2 years.
Right.
Those were early days for Airtel. IPO aa raha tha, ye sab ho raha tha. So I
Right.
used to buy about 200 crores of media in the city of Delhi.
Right.
And then by the time Airtel was also going through its transition in terms of
Right.
outsourcing the entire hardware to IBM, etc.
Right. Right.
And I was by that time the sponsor of the data warehouse. This was the first data warehouse that was being set up within Airtel. Those days we were doing about 1 billion CDRs a day.
Okay.
And we were using that data to do segmentation, forecasting, etc.
Right.
So yeah, because of this IBM transaction, no decision was being taken on the technology side of the world. So I moved out, and because of my media background, I went and joined Times of India.
Right.
As executive assistant to Sameer Jain.
Okay.
The vice chair.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
There worked for about 15 months. So the brand capital theme that you see, that is the flagship of Bennett Coleman Company.
Mm-hmm.
The white paper was written by me.
Okay.
So that and then so I spent 15 months there, and by that time this entire IBM deal with Airtel had happened. Teradata had been chosen as a platform of choice.
Right.
Amrish Rao, who's now the CEO of Pine Labs, used to be the country head for Teradata.
Interesting.
And he said, so and they'd become a friend. So he said, I had built the 5-year roadmap for Airtel.
Right.
He said, now come and deploy that roadmap from Teradata. So I joined Teradata, worked there for 7 years. So I worked with. So I started as an industry consultant. By the time I left, I was the telecom consulting practice head for Southeast Asia.
Right.
And I was heading pre-sales in India.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. And I have worked with every telco between Chandigarh and Manila. In every country between Chandigarh and Manila, you can throw a dart. It will land in a country where I would have worked with 1 or 2 telcos.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So by 2011, I was already 6-7 years into Teradata.
Right.
And Sunil by that time had moved on from Airtel.
Right.
So from SBM's office, he went to MP Chhattisgarh. I was telling you. Then he went to. Then he became CEO of Beetle, and then he went to Africa as director for special projects.
Right.
So he had come back by that time after spending 10 years in Airtel.
Right.
And wanted to start an early stage technology fund.
Interesting.
So this was, I think, end of May, and I saw a LinkedIn post from Sunil saying want to do something in the tech space, etc.
Right.
Sunil was a dear friend. Man, GK1 mein rehta tha. Sunil used to live in CR Park.
Right.
And so I picked up the phone on him at 10 in the night, and pehle to 2 galiyan di usko.
Right.
You've been 6 weeks into the country, you haven't even bothered to call.
Right.
When I asked him what he was wanting to do, so he said, I partnered with another friend of mine.
Right.
A guy called Sanjay Pandey. Sanjay is an IIM Ahmedabad grad, IHM Pusa.
Okay.
And very sharp skills on the people side of the world.
Okay.
So he and Sunil had already shaken hands and wanted to do this early stage tech fund, and they had already decided it will be called Earnest. And they had interviewed 14-15 people, but I hadn't found the right guy to come in and fill in for the tech piece.
Right.
So I said, so when he told me about all this stuff, I said, between the two of you, your understanding of technology is very shallow. So how will you do a tech fund?
Right.
So he told me, we've been looking for this guy to come in, third guy to come in and join us as a tech co-founder. I said, very good. So I said, let's catch up. So Sunil lives in Gurgaon.
Right.
Sanjay used to live in Saket. I
Uh-huh.
live in GK1, so my
Right.
office was in Saket,
Right.
and this was, I think, early June in 2011.
Interesting.
And I said, why don't we guys meet in Saket?
Right.
Select City Walk नया नया बना था. So I said, well, let's meet at 9 o'clock at Starbucks, at
जी.
Coffee Beans. So जहाँ पे Starbucks है, वहाँ पे Coffee Beans and Tea Leaf होता था पहले,
Right.
ग्राउंड फ्लोर पे. तो हमने कहा CBTL में मिलेंगे सवेरे 9 बजे. तो मैं, सुनील, संजय अपन 9 बजे सवेरे पहुंच के CBTL में, तो वो
जी.
झाड़ू मार रहे थे. तो हाँ, तो कहते हैं हम 9:30 बजे खुलते हैं, आप ना बाहर कॉरिडोर में बैठे.
Right.
तो middle of June, 40-degree temperature, 70%
Typical
humidity.
Delhi.
Typical Delhi, right?
Right.
So three of us sitting in a corridor, chatted for 3 hours,
Right.
and shook hands and decided to start Your Nest.
Right.
So
Very
that's
interesting.
how Your Nest started.
Phenomenal. What a journey. I mean, Girish, for a moment, I thought, we were just in a very casual chit chat, right? Which I think has been pending for a very long time. But, since there are some impeccable investments that you made at your Nest, right? There have been some, certain thesis, you built, which is very unique to Your Nest, right? And, and I think, it's a very interesting combination that you sort of picked and chosen, right? When you've invested in these companies, right? These were not necessarily, some of these companies were not necessarily something that, what would a typical VC sort of would have gone and invested, right? And I think you've also been very, very cash flow centric, right? Tell us a little more about, the thesis and the philosophy behind Your
Sure.
Nest from an investing standpoint. And, second is, which are some of the key sectors, right? And what's the kind of check value that you
Sure.
would typically cut for an early stage business?
Sure. So when we started, all three of us had seen how money had been made, on wealth had been created on the telecom side of the world.
Right.
And this was early days of mobile internet. So the
Sure.
thesis when we started was that mobile internet would be a similar or larger opportunity from a wealth creation perspective.
Right.
So the first fund was pretty much tech and tech enabled fund,
Okay.
where we said we will look at all sorts of opportunities. We were probably the third or the fourth fund in the country to set up.
Right.
ब्लूम था, के था, इंडिया क्वेश्चन था, और हम थे.
Right.
बॉम्बे और दिल्ली में सिर्फ हम ही थे, दिल्ली में कोई और था.
Right. जी.
So when we looked at the ecosystem, we realized that there was the deal flow was shallow.
Right.
But a lot of our peers were writing small checks.
Right.
50 lakh ka, 1 crore ka, for a 60-70 crore fund. People ended with like 30 companies, 40 companies in the portfolio.
Right.
We realized that is not something that we wanted to do.
Okay.
And we looked at some of the models in the US, etc., where people were investing with conviction.
Right.
So we said we are happy to write larger checks, up to $500,000,
right,
but we will only invest in 15 to 18 companies.
Okay.
The primary reason being that we, that this is an active asset class.
Right.
And the founders, because it was the ecosystem was very nascent, required all sorts of support and handholding that they could get from the investor.
Right.
So we said, I'm team partner, not more than 4. You cannot do justice to more than 4 or 5 opportunities at a per partner level.
Right.
Therefore, 15 to 18 companies we will invest in, write $500,000 kind of checks. Come in with conviction, put at least 12 to 18 months of cash flow on the table,
right,
and help these companies scale. Because at the end of the day, we will win when they will win in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
So our intent was to build an ecosystem of partners, vendors, who will come in and help in making these companies a success.
Mm-hmm.
And early enough in the life of the fund, we realized our understanding of, so all three of us came from enterprise backgrounds, right?
Right.
So that our understanding of the consumer ecosystem was fairly shallow.
Mm-hmm.
And these were very shallow tech opportunities. There was
right,
no sustainable, ring fencing,
right,
on the IP side, etc. And therefore the biggest differentiation was how much money are you able to raise and how quickly are you able to raise it.
Right.
And that was something that we were not very comfortable with as a construct. So we, by 2015, had already decided that we will move away from shallow tech to a deep tech fund.
Right.
And we will move away from a consumer-centric fund to an enterprise-centric fund.
Okay.
So when we said deep tech, IP became a natural progression.
Right.
So and by that time we'd seen, so the first round of entrepreneurs that came out of the ecosystem came from services backgrounds.
Right.
कोई TCS छोड़ के आया, कोई Info छोड़ के आया, कोई Bain छोड़ के आया, कोई McKinsey छोड़ के आया. Okay.
Right.
But by 2015-16, we'd seen some of these product companies throwing out entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs coming out of these companies. Flipkart कोई छोड़ के आया, company कुछ शुरू करी. कोई Freshdesk छोड़ के आया, कोई Zoho छोड़ के आया, कोई Druva छोड़ के आया. So these were product first entrepreneurs. Okay, and that shift between services mindset to a products mindset is a very difficult shift to make.
Right.
So when we saw some of those early signs of
Mhm.
how product companies were coming out of India, by that time the
Right.
new government had come in, Make in India, Startup India, all that stuff was happening.
Right.
Within our deal flow, we saw 30% of the deal flow was product centric suddenly.
Mhm. Okay.
People were wanting to build technology products, IP
Right.
led opportunities. So we said कि second fund अगर करेंगे तो deep tech करेंगे, shallow tech नहीं करेंगे,
Right.
IP led करेंगे और B2B focused करेंगे.
Okay.
एंड बाय द टाइम हार्डवेयर की अपॉर्चुनिटी भी आनी शुरू हो गई थी.
Right.
ईडीएफ आ गया था,
जी.
हमने भी एक दो का हार्डवेयर कंपनीज में इन्वेस्ट कर दिया था. और इंटरनली आवर अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ हार्डवेयर बिटवीन द थ्री ऑफ अस वाज वेरी शैलो, सो वी ऑनबोर्डेड अ फोर्थ पार्टनर.
Mhm.
Dr. Vivek Wan Singh joined us in 2016 and 2016.
Right.
He's a ITBHU grad, PhD from the US.
Mhm.
6 patents to his name, 108 research papers, sold
Very
2
interesting.
hardware companies in the valley.
Wow.
Came back to India, used to head
Right.
research at Cisco.
Mhm.
Worked with the likes of Michael Dell, Steve
Right.
Jobs, John
Right.
Chambers, etc. Okay.
Right.
So we said so he came on board, and he brought in a very interesting perspective of exits and how to scale these companies.
Okay.
So that's how the second fund kind of evolved. So
Right.
the second fund was a $30 million fund. Today we are invested in 19 companies there.
Okay.
Across these 19 companies, I have 47 patents that these companies have filed.
Wow. Interesting.
41 are in the process of being filed.
Right.
We are sitting at about 32% IRR in that fund right now as we speak.
Okay. Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, some of the marquee companies we are invested in include the Miko, which is a companion robot for young children. Dozy,
Right.
which is a health tech play where they created a slew of sensors which go under your mattress and are able to track your vitals as you sleep.
Right.
Cron AI, Tushar.
Right.
So we were the first investors in Cron. They have built a very interesting middleware for LiDAR companies, practically, which is an AR VR MR play
Right.
on the tech side of the world. So that's how the portfolio evolved.
Mhm.
So today we are now in the process of launching the third fund, which is going to be $75 million fund. The
Okay.
thesis continues to remain the same. We continue to be the first round of institutional capital. Typically, write $500,000 to $1 million pre-series A checks.
Right.
Come in after revenue model validation has already happened.
Mhm.
In a product play where IP is a key differentiator,
Right.
and you are building a global play out of India.
Mhm.
So those are the 4 or 5 things that we look for when we look at opportunity from an investment.
Very interesting. Girish, tell me this, right? So, you entered the entire enterprise tech space very early on, right? I think you're
That's correct.
possibly the leaders in that space. I think there was some work
Correct.
which was happening in Bangalore, but that was largely because there was a certain culture, and outsourcing was something which was kind of peaking, booming, all of that, right? Wasn't it a little too early? Because when you're talking about enterprise, I think enterprise is kind of swelled up in last 1.5 years, 2 years, right? At least as far as the India market is concerned, right? Otherwise, enterprise is something which has essentially been done for international markets, right? So while you made these investments, I mean, were these applications businesses built for India, or were they essentially for
So these were all businesses which were built in India but for the global market.
Interesting.
So for example, Unifor being a case in point.
Right.
We were the first round of institutional capital in Unifor way back
Mhm.
in 2014.
Right.
We came in at when the valuation was $3.5 million.
Sure.
And Ravi and Umesh were still in IIT Chennai,
Okay.
now to the entrepreneur park. Okay.
Right.
And we exited Unifor last year when they were valued at $160 million.
Right.
We made like 7x return on our investment. Returned
Interesting.
70% of the capital in a single shot, from fund one.
Right.
So we came in early enough. We had enough skin in the game, and
Sure.
and as they scaled up well,
Right.
we exited. And we realized that the entire enterprise play. Even though the sales funnels and the funnel velocity is slightly longer,
Right.
it takes 3-6 months, POCs,
Sure.
pilots, to convert an enterprise customer. But once you're converted, then it's a very sticky business.
Right.
And this is very high EBITDA margin business. 70-80% EBITDA margin is norm for par for the
Right.
course.
Right.
And therefore, the amount of capital that you need to build a B2B unicorn is actually 1/3 of what it is required to build a consumer unicorn.
Interesting.
So we did some study about 18 months ago.
Right.
Now, the average ticket size to build a consumer unicorn was about $450 million.
Okay.
Whereas a B2B unicorn is typically built in $120 to $150 million from a
Right.
capital efficiency perspective.
Right.
So it's 3x more capital efficient.
But I mean, Girish, when we talk of that, right? I mean, honestly speaking, the way money is being thrown around, right? I mean, you've seen the kind of influx of capital that has happened, right? I think last 1 year has been absolutely unreal. I mean, and I think, all of a sudden, it's become overwhelming, right? In terms of the kind of money that is flown in, right? Does this theory still stand correct?
Yes, it
The
does.
150 billion.
Yeah, it does.
Has it? I mean, has the
150 might have 150 might have gone to 180,
right?
But 450 would have also gone to 500 or 550. Because everybody's chasing the same set of consumer. Please understand.
Right.
Swiggy, Zomato, Paytm, everybody wants to talk to the same set of 1-2% customers.
Right.
But and therefore customer acquisition costs have gone through the roof.
But isn't that correct for enterprise business as well? I mean, Girish, and at the end of the day, enterprise business is also limited world, right? In fact, more so because you're just talking to a handful of customers.
Correct. Therefore the strategy is to build in India at Indian prices and sell globally.
Okay.
You can't build an Indian B2B unicorn selling in India. Period.
Right.
You have to step outside the shore. You have to sell in Singapore. You have to sell in Australia. You have to sell in the US, Europe, and and all other parts of the world.
Interesting.
But the point is that what the TCS and Infosys of the world did in terms of labor arbitrage.
Right.
By getting people at $2 an hour and selling at their services at $20 an hour.
Right.
Is exactly what enterprise SaaS companies do in India.
Right.
Build a product at Indian prices. You get a good CTO at 60 lakhs. You get a good coder at 30 lakhs, and the product sells for like $1,000 a pop every month. In the US markets.
Right.
So that it's a very creditable and doable strategy.
Right. Interesting. Girish, while we say that, right? I mean, there are many applications that are getting built in those markets itself, right?
That's correct.
I understand the cost arbitrage, but eventually, when you sort of enter those markets, you're selling almost at the same price, right?
Correct.
And I think there is also different kind of comfort.
That's where IP comes into play, no, Ashu?
Okay.
47 patents. As I told you, and the IP is not very easy to create.
Right.
It requires thought. It requires strategy.
Sure.
It requires patience.
Right. I mean, that was actually my question. That was exactly my question, right? I mean, when you choose to be in, for example, with an IP-led business, right? Aren't you exposing yourself to a much longer-term risk, around that business?
So typically, typically it takes a company anywhere between 24 to 36 months to file their first IP.
Okay.
Right. But once that is filed, there are enough and more ways to ring fence that IP by filing subsequent IPs. So Uniphore, for example, in the first 5 years, I think they have filed 3 IPs, and then in the next 5 they filed another 10 or 11.
Right.
Cron, for example, they filed their first IP in 2017, and now they are filing. Now today they have eight patents on their books.
Interesting.
So it's a strategy to build IP.
Right.
It requires patience. It requires the right kind of capitalization.
Right.
It requires focus from the founding team.
Interesting.
And attention, correct? Because you cannot outsource it to an IP firm.
I think it's a very different kind of a commitment and seriousness.
Correct, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where the tenacity, the patience, and the vision of the founder comes into play.
Absolutely.
But it gives you a long-term sustainable advantage.
Right.
And therefore, why would you not do it? Is the question.
Interesting. Girish, while of course we've been discussing enterprise, right? And I've personally a big fan of enterprise, right? And I think if you can do right in that environment, I mean, I have been looking at a bunch of businesses, right, that are bootstrapped, right, and they're actually selling to enterprise, and they're doing a phenomenal job, by the way, right?
Correct.
And I think I kind of buy your, while you were actually saying that, right, in my mind, I was doing the math, right? A lot of these businesses essentially are operating at just about 10-15% of cost, right? And rest everything else is essentially leading into free cash flow, right? In the company.
Absolutely.
Which is a beautiful position to be in, right? And I think that
especially when shit hits the roof, right? Literally when COVID happened.
Yeah. Right.
There was there was no revenue for 6 months, boss.
Correct.
And if you are in a cash burn mode without enough capitalization and without enough money in the bank, you are up shit creek without a paddle.
Right.
Okay. Through this entire 18-month period or 15-month period of COVID, we've had zero mortality in the portfolio.
Interesting.
Because these companies were already cash efficient.
Right.
They were capitalized sufficiently. Even when revenue was not there, they were able to manage their costs effectively.
Right.
And when it started coming back, it came back with all the the momentum that you typically carry once there is no business for 3 years or
Right.
3 months, right?
Right.
So most of our companies today, even by end of December, were actually clocking more revenue than they were clocking in the pre-COVID times.
Oh, very interesting.
Because at the end of the day, when business came back, it came back with a vengeance.
Right. It did.
And the beauty, Ashu, of enterprise model is that because you are integrated in the core systems of the organization,
Right.
it is very difficult to replace.
Right.
It is like trying to change a wheel while the car is running.
Right.
It does not happen very easily.
No, and I think thank God, Girish, also the fact that I think at a policy level, I think at a political level, at a diplomacy level, I think across the board, right? I think at a bureaucratic level, I think institutions were a lot more agile, right? So unlike many crises that we've seen, right? Especially say 2008 and many others that we've seen, right? This wasn't a crisis that got
Correct.
Where kind of enterprises to fold up, right? And I think it could be sustained in that sense, which also means that enterprise or startups which were selling in the enterprise space could sort of sustain themselves with minor cuts and I think dents, right, in the process.
So all our companies went through salary cuts. I think all of them restored salaries by September, October.
Sure.
Pre-Diwali, and as I said, all of them crossed their pre-COVID revenue run rates by December.
Wonderful. So, Girish, a slightly different note, right? While of course you've been focusing on deep tech, you've been focusing on enterprise, you've been doing all of those things, right? How about opportunities like fintech, agri-tech, right? These are some massive opportunities that have come in, right? And all of a sudden, I think India has become a very, very exciting market in the sense because we are talking about a lot of enterprise, we're talking about a lot of other opportunities, right? And I think there are a lot of these pieces these are a lot of opportunities that have come up within these sectors, right? How are you looking at that? I mean, is that a conscious you're letting go of it, or
no.
Is that
so
something
we've done a few fintech opportunities.
Okay.
So we are invested in a company called CredRite, which is using alternate data sets to do credit rating.
Right.
And they get access to these data sets because they work with a lot of chit fund managers, which is now a regulated industry from the RBI.
Right.
So chit industry today is a $12 billion industry annually in terms of this amount of savings that are routed through chit funds.
Right.
So CredRite does that. We are also invested in a company called Expedise, which is doing invoice discounting.
Oh, very interesting. Okay.
Both on balance sheet for the enterprise and off balance sheet for the vendor.
Okay.
So they started in August 2020, and I think in May they did like 60 crores in disbursements.
Interesting.
And they will clock 100 crores before Diwali.
Wow.
So that's how rapid that scale up has been.
Right.
So we've done fintech, and we will continue to look at some of these new fintech opportunities. Agritech, I would have seen about. So I manage deal flow, for you honest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I would have personally seen in the 9 years about 19,000 companies.
Right.
Out of which agritech would be about 2,500.
Right.
So I've seen every agritech company literally in the country.
Right.
At least 90 to 95% of them.
Right.
Everyone. The challenge in agritech in India is very different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that is one, the land holdings are very small, average, and therefore the capacity for the farmer to pay for a product or a service is very limited.
Mm-hmm.
There are large land holdings, but on an average, and people have worked with guys who do contract farming, 500 acres for Pepsi and 500 acres for XYZ. But generally speaking, at an overall level, when we looked at the lay of the land, we realized that was one challenge. The other challenge was in agri-tech. If you were to do deep tech opportunities, so you could do the typical two-sided marketplaces, which are shallow tech, etc. But if you were to do deep tech opportunities, it's very difficult to scale because agri produce per se, changes every 50 kilometers.
Right.
So if you were to trying to build an AI model to gauge the quality of tomato, you would probably need like 5,000 models to cover India.
Right.
Because every 50 kilometers, the topography changes, the soil changes, the amount of water which is available changes, the quality of the seeds changes.
Sure.
And it's just impossible. It's very difficult to build a scalable model when you have to do which is not replicable. When for a single commodity you have to build 2,000 models. You have 25 commodities. You're talking about 50,000 models running at any given point in time.
Right.
That's not easy to do. So these two combined, we've not is the reason we've not done any agri-tech opportunities.
Interesting.
We've seen product companies, but so those products cost like 50,000 bucks a pop toss.
Right.
It tells you humidity, it tells you pH value, it tells you,
Right.
soil efficiency, it tells you. We've seen drone-based image capturing solutions, which will use hyperspectral imagery to tell you where is the fungal infection, where is phosphorus come hai, either nitrogen come hai, etc., etc. But generally speaking, the capacity for the end user to pay for something like this is limited.
Right.
And therefore we've stayed away from it.
Interesting. But Girish, also what has happened is, as soon as we start talking about all of these areas, right, and there are very interesting intersections that starts to sort of become very, very enticing opportunities. Let me put it this way, right? So as soon as you for example, say agri-tech, right, or a cross section of say agri-tech and fintech, right, all of a sudden becomes very, very exciting. And there have been some very successful companies that have been funded by some of the other venture capital funds in that process, right? Where what they're trying to do is, there is an opportunity that exists in an offline setting, right, and kind of digitizing that opportunity, right, bringing it online, which could mean that there is no, for example, say big data opportunity immediately, but eventually as the transactions start to happen, right, as more and more markets start to operate in platforms like this, right, there is going to be data opportunity which is going to emerge, right, which is going to help many stakeholders in the process, right?
Sure, it will.
And could increase the velocity of the entire sector. So is that something which is which you've evaluated, or how do you break it down?
Yeah, so we've evaluated all this stuff,
Right.
and the bigger challenge on the fintech side with farmers is that every 5 years, as soon as election comes, there is this talk of loan waivers, right? And the propensity of a farmer to pay when he knows that in 6 months potentially he could get a loan waiver, is very poor,
right?
And that is not going to change anytime soon,
right?
So some of the NPAs that we've heard of, in these fintech plays is just unbelievable. You cannot sustain a business if you have 20% NPAs loss.
Right.
Kitna equity capital plus there was this entire MFI model that used to run, right? One day Andhra Pradesh changed the entire regulation and the entire MFI model went for a toss.
Right.
So stuff like this happens in the small ticket size fintech opportunities.
Right.
And yes, it is a large opportunity. Bharat is a very, very large opportunity. There's no two ways about it. But because it is shallow tech, and because the only differentiation is, as I said, the amount of money that you have in the bank.
Right.
Something that we are not very comfortable with. But having said that, if a good team comes about, which is doing some interesting stuff in this space, will we look at it? Yes, we will look at it.
Interesting.
But till date, we have looked at a lot of opportunities and chosen to give them a pass.
Right. So, Girish, is that also where you're trying to evaluate how it's going to? I mean, I know that's part of your job, right? But I'm saying, I talk to many people, right, on the investing circuit, right? And more often than not, what comes through is that, listen, we're taking a bet on the team, right? So management becomes a very, very critical play, right? I mean, there are systemic issues that you really cannot control, right? I mean, this is something which is beyond your control, like the Andhra Pradesh incident that you sort of talked about, right? There is only limited stuff that you can do around it, right? But the only constant in the process is the team, right? So essentially, for many others, right, that becomes the primary decision-making factor, right? Of course, there has to be a
for
level
us
of
also. For us also. So we are the only fund in the country where a full-time executive coach, leadership development guy is a GP in the fund.
Okay.
Sanjay is the only guy on the IC who has a veto. If Sanjay, once Sanjay evaluates the team and tells us that we should walk away from it, we will walk away from the transaction without batting an eyelid. So that's how sharp our focus is on the team. But the point is, at the end of the day, the team will be, even if it is a good team, I'm of the belief that an A-class team will turn around even a B-class product.
Right.
But a B-class team will even run into ground an A-class product.
Right.
So unfortunately in agri-tech, we haven't seen the marriage of an A-class team with an A-class opportunity.
Right.
And probably that is the reason why we've stayed away from it. But as I said, if an A-class team comes about and are trying to solve for a large problem, which has a deep tech angle to it, will we look at it? 100%.
Interesting. So I think what I hear you saying is that it's a balance, right, between the two. There has to be, while of course the team has to be good, it also has to have a visibility in the opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it cannot be a 60-40 or a 70-30. I think it has to be a 50-50, more like a 45-55, but
Yeah,
somewhere fall in that range.
correct. And as I said, some of these are. So, will there be a large company coming out of agritech in the next
Right.
5 years? Yes. Okay.
Right.
But can I, with hand on my heart, name the top 10 companies in agritech today, which would be one of those, large companies? No.
Sure. Interesting. So I think agri-tech was essentially just a case in point, right? I mean, I think
Similarly. So we've seen, for example,
yeah,
space tech, we've seen
right.
genomics.
Mhm.
No, space tech TRL 0 to TRL 5, TRL 10 is a 6-year journey.
Mhm.
My fund life is 8 years.
Right.
Very difficult to be, to be able to justify, an investment in something like that.
Sure. So Girish, please go ahead. Sorry, my bad. Please go ahead.
Genomics, for example, we don't understand, and
Right.
therefore, until and unless we build expertise into the company, to do some of these genomics opportunities, will we
Right.
invest in genomics? Unlikely. So our focus is also, please understand, for us, the supply of capital comes from our investors.
Correct.
And I have to align my exit timelines with their expectation.
Absolutely. Right.
And therefore, a lot of these opportunities could be 10, 15-year opportunities. So if I do a 15-year fund, will I do a space tech or an agri-tech opportunity? Maybe.
Maybe, yes. Yeah.
But with an 8-year fund, can I do it? Unlikely.
So Girish, I have an important and interesting question, right? And this is a little different from our discussion, which where we were discussing possibilities and opportunities and all that, right? Is that when you are the construct of a fund is, for example, say from a market like India, which is it's a more risk averse market, right? Does that also dominate the decision making of the IC, right? Would you look for, and this is not a comment on your nest, this is more generic understanding that I want to draw out of this particular question, is that if you're essentially a fund which is raised in a risk averse market, right? Does that curtail your ability to go out and take risky bets? Because the possibility of doing an ongoing round, the continuous round, or the kind of liquidity which is available in a market which is just slightly more mature, like say the US and other such markets, right? Is higher, right? Because you can go on to fund those losses. The mindset is very different. What are your thoughts about that? Is this a correct understanding, or is there other nuances to it?
So we were the first fund in the country where 88% capital came from domestic investors. The first fund. Okay. So we actually were pioneers, literally, in terms of giving access to this asset class for Indian investors.
Okay.
In the second fund, 75% of the capital has come from domestic investors.
Interesting.
And the fund size was 2.2 times.
Right.
The first fund was 90 crores. The second fund was 250 crores.
Right.
Okay. And we've seen that the depth of the market from a availability of capital perspective has improved. Tremendous.
Right.
So today, no family office worth its salt will not have a VC allocation, whether it is 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever it is.
Right.
So therefore, and the thesis even when we started was that there is enough risk capital available in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we went after the domestic capital and not in international capital.
Right.
But once the capital is in the kitty, our investors gave us carte blanche. Literally.
Right.
As long as we stick to the thesis, and we stick to standard governance processes that we put articulated as part of our, private placement memorandum.
Right.
The investors have no problem if I take risky bets or if I do not take risky bets. So I don't think the investor, the source of capital decides the risk appetite of a fund.
Right.
I think that is decided by the mindset of the partners who are running the fund. Okay. We, all three of us, are generally conservative.
Right.
Middle class backgrounds, first time fund managers.
Right.
And therefore that ethos we've been able to build internally, which is very strong. So we have no fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in the second fund, in the first 3 years, I did 7 investments.
Right.
In the last 12 months, I've done 12 investments. Okay, because the opportunity was there to accelerate the investment cycle.
Right.
Because nobody was writing checks.
Sure.
As COVID hit, and we ran this program called SOAR,
Right.
in early May 2020. We got 1,900 applications in 2 weeks. Our commitment was that we will issue a term sheet in 4 weeks from the end of the application process. We
Right.
issued 6 term sheets by middle of June. Those companies are now in the 4 of those 6 companies are now as part of the portfolio.
Interesting.
So we have, as I said, we've done stuff which has been path breaking in the ecosystem.
Right.
And that's always held us in good stead. The entire transition from consumer to internet, consumer to enterprise,
Right.
shallow tech to deep tech, IP, non-IP to IP led, services to product, has held us in good stead over the last 9 years.
Right.
And for example, the third fund is exactly the same focus. We will do pre-series A investments, $500,000 to $1 million check sizes in IP-led, enterprise-focused opportunities, building for the world. That's the thesis for the third fund. And there is enough opportunity in the country to do this.
Interesting.
Both on the supply of capital side and as well as deployment of capital side.
Interesting. Girish, and I hear you, right? When you say that in the last 1.5 years you've invested in 12 companies and stuff like that, right? And I'm going to go back to COVID, right? I think this has been a very, this is like a watershed event that has happened in pretty much all of our lives. I mean, this is not something that any of us anticipated.
No.
We weren't calibrated for it. I mean, this has been absolutely bizarre in that sense, right? But what it's also done is that it's kind of, pushed us into being, a market which is far more connected, far more agile. Enterprises are talking about technology adoption in a very different way. They've started to understand risk in a very different way. Business continuity risk, which was something that a lot of consulting companies used to talk about, was never pursued so seriously, right? And I think all of a sudden it's become very
right in the face when this happened.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And I think the adoption has been absolutely phenomenal, right? And of course, what it's done possibly is it's made us a more agile market where there's going to be more information available. It's going to be far more transparent and stuff like that, right? Do you think, is this the right setting for us to become a product economy, right? We've been a distribution focused economy, right? We were essentially building for it, right? We were sorting out the last miles. Correct. And so many other experiences and all that, right?
Correct.
But do you think now it's come a time where this is going to be a very different phase for India as a country, right? Where many enterprise products, and in fact, not just enterprise, but I think across the board, technology adoption is not going to go through a very rudimentary
shift,
mindset which existed, right? Where people constantly used to push technology adoption, right? Are we headed for that phase? I mean, what's your sense of it? I mean, how is the portfolio looking in that sense? What is your macro sense on this particular phase that we are entering?
No. So I think technology adoption will only go through the roof. People who are sitting on the fence will have no choice but to adopt it quicker,
sure.
faster, be more agile. Okay.
Sure.
Expectations from your end consumers have changed.
Right.
And a lot of this will not go back, ratchet back to pre-COVID times.
Sure.
And therefore, this watershed event has literally shown us that, for example, I don't think any large corporate would go back to 5 days working from office.
Right.
Anytime soon.
Right.
Right. You will probably go back to 2 days, 3 days, or whatever. But that's a fundamental shift in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of access to infrastructure, broadband, working from home, etc., etc. And therefore, if your systems and processes don't keep pace with time, you will struggle to service the customer. And therefore, and a lot of enterprises realize this. And the more nimble ones have already adopted and adapted. The less nimble will be left with no choice but to adapt and adapt.
Right.
And to my mind, world will never be again the same as we left it in the pre-COVID times.
Right.
And this technology, acceptance will only pick up pace. And in the B2B side of the world, and there will be multiple facets of that that will emerge over the next few years. Now, AI, for example, today is already mainstream. Cybersecurity will become Industry 4.0. The IoT plays, immersive experiences, all that stuff. Is going to distributed ledger technologies, etc. All that stuff will become mainstream in the next 5 years. if it is
Very
not
interesting.
already mainstream.
Very interesting.
You know,
Uh,
and technology and CTOs of organizations will have no choice but to adapt, because their competition will force them to do it.
right. Interesting. Girish, what are some of the areas that you've been excited about? I mean, which are some of the areas that, is there a thesis shift that has happened from last year, or it's become even stronger, right? I mean, because, you were
So
essentially, must have been, I mean, what I understand from what you're saying and what you've said, right, across our conversation, right? So essentially, this has been an absolutely perfect time from a thesis standpoint, right? I think whatever you were sort of planning and calibrated for,
correct.
I mean, this has been a very relevant year in that sense, right?
That's correct.
So, I mean, do you continue with the same thesis, or is there an evolution in the thesis that you have, right? And certain areas have become now far more interesting, and you're looking at them more keenly.
Sure. So no, so the thesis continues to be deep tech, and
Sure.
two legs to deep tech. One is this entire software leg, which
Right.
is AI, ML, distributed ledger technologies, AR, VR, MR. Okay, and the other is this hardware leg to deep tech, which is
Right.
robotics, wearables, IoT, etc.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
so and we've been sector agnostic completely. So as
Mhm.
long as we are focused around these 5-6 core technologies,
Right.
we will continue to work in the similar space.
Right.
The only difference would be that earlier I was looking at opportunities which were married of one or more technologies. Now we will start looking at opportunities as a marriage of two or more technologies.
Right.
Industrial IoT, AI,
Sure.
and distributed ledgers, for example,
Right.
or an AI with an MR VR angle and a fintech. So so some of those evolutions will happen. But generally speaking, our focus from the core 5-6 technologies is not going to change, because we think that's how the world will evolve in the next 10-15 years. Some of these technologies, as I said, are already mainstream. Some of
Right.
these will become mainstream,
Right.
and therefore we want to basically have a pole position as we take positions in some of these underlying investing companies.
Interesting. Girish, any intersections you think are going to become large enough, which could lead into very, very interesting opportunities? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I think cybersecurity, AI is a good intersection that one is looking at. The entire IoT plus EV stack is a good intersection that one is looking at.
Right.
There is a quantum compute a bit too early, but we are looking at some opportunities in that space as well, because we think that could be a complete shift in terms of how technology impacts human life. Suddenly the current cryptographic algorithms, etc., will become redundant, and therefore what can you do to ensure that world continues from a cybersecurity perspective as we went into COVID, etc. So some of those opportunities are the ones that one is looking at. We've taken a few bets on the EV side of the world, charging infrastructure, battery management systems, etc. So that we think is going to be an interesting play. So that's broadly how we are seeing it pan out over the next few years.
Right.
And we are always on the lookout of new technologies, new
Right.
disruptive plays out there. So, and if we see something which is interesting, which is a marriage of multiple of these technologies, we'll be more than happy to double click and figure out if it's worth bringing into the portfolio.
Girish, we're towards the end of our conversation. My second last question, right? I think something that you've highlighted as well, and I think all of us constantly sort of believe this, right? Because we operate in the VC ecosystem, right? Is that team is a very significant and a very, very critical foundational piece, right? When it comes to any business, right? What are some of the things that you look at, right? You invest in many companies, right? Are you okay for? I mean, is it okay for founders to mature over a period of time? Do you look at a very strong foundational understanding? Is experience important? Because that's a new breed of founders that we're seeing, right? About 5-7 years back, we used to celebrate the 20-year-olds starting out, right? I think there's a significant shift, right? And I think your fintech, you see many founders who are essentially who've done who have an experience of working for 10, 12 years, 13 years, and now kind of
ex-bankers,
absolutely, and they come with a lot of functional experience, right? So is this something which is also now do you look at that as well? Give me a construct of the founding team that you think or is ideal to say your nest thesis of investing.
Yeah, so for us, the ideal team size is 3 people. Okay, and because we do deep tech, one of them has to be a technology guy.
Right.
Okay. The other guy is an operations subject matter expert
Sure.
person, and the third guy is a sales / fundraising guy.
Sure.
And all these three jobs are full-time jobs.
Right.
So for me, the ideal team size is 3 people, one looking at each of these opportunities. So
Right.
we've done 2 per member teams, and where the third skill was missing, we brought in the third skill.
Right.
We've done single member teams, but only when the underlying team below the CEO was strong enough to manage these two, the other two gaps. Okay?
Right.
So for us, that's the way we look at it. So
Right.
as we go in, what are the skill sets that the team brings to the table? Where are
Right.
the identified gaps? And some of those identified gaps are condition precedents for us to invest.
Right.
For example, I'm investing in a company right now, single founder, but we said we need somebody who can drive sales for you.
Right.
So for him to bring a co-founder who's going to drive sales for him is a condition precedent. We will write a check only when he onboards the co-founder.
Okay.
So we've gone to that extent to ensure that the team that we back is
Right.
is complete from all perspectives.
Right.
So that's this kind of stuff we do. And as you rightly said, team is the only thing that differentiates one opportunity from the other.
Right.
And therefore, our focus on backing the right set of entrepreneurs, backing the right team,
Right.
is very, very, very sharp.
Right.
In fact, I will go to the extent that for example, for the CEO's first line hires, in most cases it would be a reserved matter for us.
Right.
So the company or the founder cannot hire his
very-
first line without an express approval from us.
Right.
Which means
But isn't that too harsh?
No, which means Sanjay gets an opportunity to speak to the guy who's coming in. No.
Okay.
The other thing you said, what do you look for? Across
Right.
two founders. For us, uniformity of vision is extremely important.
Right.
If one founder is saying, I want to build a 500 crore company, the other founder is saying, I want to build a 50 crore company, sooner than later they will clash.
Right.
And therefore our interest is to ensure that both the founders are thinking in the right direction. They want to go get there together. There is a certain matching of the mind, matching of the value system,
Right.
so that the longevity of team is taken care of. Because most of the companies that we've seen fail essentially because the team breaks.
Right.
And that's the reason why our focus on team is so sharp.
Right. Interesting. Girish, my last question. We discussed this, right? So COVID has brought in a very different kind of an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity where actually people are spending, right? Enterprise has always been paying, right? It was a decision making was slow, right? But this time around, I think even the enterprise, for example, was very, very agile, right? People were taking very quick calls. Adoption happened literally overnight, right? And there are many, many examples of that, right? What has happened is, we used to advocate for many, many businesses, right? They weren't, say, revenue generating, right? We were essentially, engagement was like a matrix, right? And that could happen in enterprise space, with certain premium or free versions, and then of course you're layering it up with, say, premium versions and stuff like that, right? Or paid versions or paid features, and so on and so forth, right? Do you think it's advisable, given that we have an ecosystem, there's like a complete change that has happened, right? Consumer is willing to pay, be it enterprise, be it individuals, right? Do you think founders need to reconsider or reprioritize building companies with a zero revenue play early on? Is land grab still relevant in that sense? What are your thoughts about it?
So on the B2B side of the world, land grab is a slow process.
Sure.
It takes anywhere between 6 to 9 months for a corporate to take a call. Even
Right.
while COVID is there. In COVID, it went down to 3 months, but then it's back to 6 months. Okay?
Right.
The decision, so there is a POC that you will do, then you will do a paid pilot, then you will go
Right.
into the commercial negotiation. It's a rigmarole. You have to go
Right.
through that. Okay.
Right.
But having said that, I think there is clear understanding from the founder's perspective that the first 5-10 customers of yours will make or break the opportunity.
Right.
So founders today know that if you get 2 lighthouse customers,
Mhm.
who are giving you 10, 10, 15, 20,000 ARR kind of a number,
Right.
The potential that you will be able to convert more is much higher. So to woo those lighthouse customers, they are willing to walk the extra mile.
Right.
Which is the right thing to do.
Okay.
But I've seen founders also step back and say, this is only a $3,000 ARR opportunity, and therefore I'm not going to spend disproportionate time chasing this guy.
Right.
Inside sales has picked up.
Right.
As a GTM. Okay. And therefore a lot of our enterprise teams have, inside sales managers, etc., who are scarring the net, tracking people on LinkedIn, writing blogs, etc., to build that, to cast that funnel wide enough, so that even if it takes 6 months to come from the other side of the funnel, you still have enough, stuff in process to ensure that you get $1 million ARR 12 months from now.
Right.
Typical conversions are 20-25%. So if you need to get to $1 million ARR, you need a $4 million funnel, right?
Absolutely.
And therefore you have to cast the net wide. You have no choice.
Right.
So all that, because some of these founders have come from product first companies, they bring in some of these experiences with them.
Right.
So they've seen that it is not such an easy to build a B2B business.
Right.
And then you bolte hain, aate dal ka bhav pata hai.
Right.
And therefore they come with that mindset. And
Right.
also as investors, we also understand that this is not such an easy play to build. So we're not pushing. We're saying, okay, you want to get to $1 million ARR, don't push for 6 months, go after 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Because it will take you that time.
Right.
There's no point in putting stress on yourself and the team to get to a stage which is not possible to do.
Mm-hmm.
However much tailwind you might have.
Right.
But revenue is important.
Right.
You can have 10,000 customers who are using you on a free basis.
Right.
But when you start charging, you realize that only 100 will pay.
Right.
That kind of 1% conversion rate is something which you will not, in a B2B play, is something that you will not, is not desirable.
Right.
You will need serious conversion rates to kick in for you to be able to get to that $1 million ARR, which makes you eligible for a Series A, for example.
Right.
So that's the way we've seen things pan out, and founders are mature today.
Right.
As I said, they've come back from product first companies, and they know
Right.
that building a product pipeline, a product funnel is not such an easy thing.
Right. Girish, last question. What's your advice to founders on the India opportunity, right? My sense is this is the time to go out and build, right? I mean, it can't get better than this. I mean, it's a wide open canvas right now. What are your thoughts about it?
No, absolutely. I think no time is, as they said, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday.
Right.
The second best time is today, right? The same analogy holds for founders. The best time to start as an entrepreneur was yesterday.
Right.
The second best time is today. And therefore, if you're not capitalizing on your dreams, on the opportunity, on your aspirations, then you're doing a disservice to yourself.
Interesting. Girish, on that note, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you with us. I mean, I've always loved my conversations with you. I'm looking forward to that cup of coffee, right? Which is long pending. Thank you so much for taking the time out. Look forward to catching up with you soon.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Ashu, for having me.
Thanks, Girish. Bye.